My bad. In this Sunday's gospel, we have the simple continuation of last week's story. As you recall, last week's story of Jesus beginning his ministry in the town of Nazareth. And he goes right into the synagogue on that Sabbath and gives this sublime teaching of a different kind, which everyone immediately realizes shows that Jesus has a different kind of authority. And of course, it's proved by the demoniac, the man possessed with a demon who comes forward, and then Jesus displays the power, the divine power, the power of God, to take this demon away from the man and to make the man whole. And so now we simply continue directly afterwards in this story. We're still in Mark chapter 1. And as Mark chapter 1 continues, we're noticing the difference, the immediate difference that the Lord is continuing to make. It's a striking story. If you were to have heard this again in Jesus' time, this was something that we talked about last week, that in Jesus' day there were prescribed actions for every circumstance. And obviously, right, what was seen in the synagogue on that Sunday did not go according to what was written, according to what was supposed to happen. And so everyone's in an uproar. And so now you have this next occasion where Jesus is meeting this leper. And the first sentence of this passage, a leper came to Jesus and kneeled down before him. That was already out of line. To do that for this leprous man was already against the law. If you recall from the first reading, we heard from the book of Leviticus, which is often called the strangest, most boring of all the Old Testament books. And it's strange and it seems boring because it's literally filled with the laundry list of all of the precepts of the law of Moses. All of the things that needed to be followed, all of the little teeny minutia that said, this is how you shall act, this is how you shall prepare, this is how you shall keep things clean, this is how you shall offer your sacrifices. If this circumstance occurs, this is exactly what you're supposed to do. It was very clearly laid out. And the book of Leviticus, the third book of the Torah, the third book also of the Old Testament in Christian scriptures, Leviticus has 3 whole chapters, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, on leprosy, chapters 13 and 14 and 15, as we number them today, that give the very specific directions as to how a priest is to determine who is leprous, if you're not sure whether something is leprosy, how you're supposed to wait it out and observe, and how you have to quarantine for 7 days if you're suspected of having leprosy, and having to return to the priest, and if you are unclean, having to separate yourself, and if for a miraculous reason you think that your condition has changed, you have to go back to the priest. So the priest, even from the days of the law of Moses, that would be the sons of Aaron, and what would become the tribes of Levi, they were the gatekeepers. And so if you had leprosy, the only one that you could approach was a priest from the tribe of Levi. Now, I don't know if anyone remembers from there. Maybe Pat, maybe you remember. I don't know. I'll just ask you. Jesus was from one of the 12 tribes, and the tribe that Jesus was from was associated with the lion. I'm curious, do you remember which tribe is associated with the lion? Which of the 12 sons? It's one of the sons, his name starts with a J. Close. Jacob was the father of the 12, and you said? Jeremiah, one of the prophets. How about J, and it ends in Uda? Okay, good. Yes, that's right. That's it. Pat, thank you for indulging me. It's really hard to be put on the spot. Here's the thing. We often know the answers. We just don't know that we know them, and then we're on the spot. I don't even know the answers when I'm put on the spot, so it's okay, Patrick. Judah. Jesus was, obviously, he was Jewish. He was not from the tribe of Levi. He was from the tribe of Judah, of David's line. So a leprous man was not allowed to show himself to Jesus because he wasn't a Levite priest. So we're already in a condition here where someone is going to another Jewish man who does not have the authority. This is where we were really picking up. If you remember last week, one of the main points that I preached on was this idea of the authority of Jesus, and how the authority of Jesus is way, way, way different than anybody has ever seen. Jesus knows this, right? We're still in chapter 1. We're still at the very beginning of the ministry of Jesus. And so Jesus knows that the authority that he's displaying, the power that he is displaying, is kind of going to become contentious, because people are now seeing his authority and not being obedient to the authority given to them by the law of Moses. The authority given to them by God in the law of Moses was to say, no, this authority, this gatekeeper belongs to the Levites. Now, the second thing that's really, really striking, even about that first sentence, that a leprous man comes before Jesus and kneels down and begs him and says, if you will, you can make me clean. This is also extraordinary to you, if you're seeing this in real time, because lepers are never made clean. Ever. If you get leprosy, literally short of a miracle, you're not healed from leprosy. In fact, in the entire Old Testament, there are only 2 occasions ever written in which someone with leprosy is healed. And wouldn't you know it, the healing comes at the hands of 2 of the greatest prophets of the Old Testament. The first time leprosy was healed was actually in the time of Moses. Moses, who sort of had his left hand and right hand helpers, Aaron and Miriam. And Aaron and Miriam were with Moses, but along the journey of their exodus, there was a point at which Aaron and Miriam become very envious of Moses, and very envious of the way that God speaks to Moses, and the way that God speaks through Moses to the people. And they're like, well, how does Moses get all of this good stuff? Aren't we also ones who speak through? God speaks through us? Well, it's kind of very briefly described in the story. However, evidently there was more going on, because God was so angry with Aaron and with Miriam that he actually strikes Miriam with leprosy as punishment for disobeying God and for holding envy in her heart against her brother Moses. And Moses, seeing the leprosy of Miriam, immediately cries out and begs God and says, let this not be. Please, Lord, heal Miriam of her leprosy. God, speaking sternly with Moses and Aaron and Miriam, directs Moses to quarantine Miriam for 7 days, as was written. And after 7 days, she returned to the camp, right, of the Israelites, and presented herself to Moses and was clean. And so she was able to return and continue on the journey. The only other time in scriptures that it's ever recorded that a leper was cleansed was the story from the time of Elisha the prophet, when Naaman the Syrian was cleansed. And Elisha, who was the protege of Elijah, they have really similar names, and upon Elijah's sort of ascension in the chariots of fire off to heaven, leaves his mantle that falls to the ground that Elisha takes upon himself. And so Elisha walks about with the mantle, the power of Elijah the prophet before him. And he also, through the power of God, is able to heal one with leprosy. And that's it. That's it. Nobody ever, and if it happened, it wasn't recorded. And you would have assumed that if it did happen, it probably would have been recorded in the Old Testament scriptures, but it wasn't. So this is all we have. The only evidence that we have, the only evidence that anyone would ever have known, is that this is how authority works. This is what happens. This is how authority functions when bad things happen, and that's just how it is. And so then Jesus now comes onto the scene, cures the demoniac, begins to cure and drive out demons in all of the nearby towns. And now the leprous man comes and realizes that this authority has power to do something that has never been seen before, except by 2 of the greatest prophets that God ever put on the face of the earth. So this man is clearly placing Jesus on a pedestal level with the highest of the best of the most of the closest of the, you name it, that God has ever gifted to humanity and his own people that he's chosen. Now you have context for what kind of seems like the strange response of Jesus. What's not strange about this? Well, what's not strange about this is that Jesus has pity and compassion. And knows that his very mission upon this earth is to heal. He doesn't deny people healing. This is so striking as well about all the gospel stories, is that people come up to Jesus and they want to touch him, they kneel down before him, they beg him, they plead with him. Jesus, so freely gives out the divine power. He doesn't really hold it. You don't see Jesus holding back on anybody, except perhaps temporarily if he wants to draw forth from them a greater faith, or if he knows that they don't really have faith and aren't really asking him for something that he can give to them. But if anyone's heart came before Jesus and was sincere in their sufferings, in their sinfulness, and Jesus, saw in their hearts, if he knew that they came before him truly desirous, he did it. Man, he just did it. It was awesome. So after he does this, after he shows himself on par, at least with Moses and Elisha, which is no small feat, for those in that day who would have seen this, Jesus immediately follows up and he says this: "See that you tell no one anything, but go show yourself to the priest and offer for your cleansing what Moses prescribed. That will be proof for them." He warned him sternly. He dismissed him at once. He clearly wants this man to keep things quiet and to do things properly according to the law of Moses. Now, the man doesn't do this. This is a problem. Why is this a problem? Because of what Jesus already knows he's going to be contending with. He's very well aware that people are going to think that the power structures have changed, and now those who had power are going to feel like my power is being taken from me. And not only is my power being taken from me, this is actually the power that the law of Moses, which is given to us by God himself, says that I am to receive. It's not like the power or the authority was even illegitimate. The Levites were given this authority. People were supposed to go to them in order to be declared clean. So Jesus, from the beginning of his ministry, knowing that his power is showing something different to the people, tries to be so clear with them about who he is and who he's not, especially in regard to those who are not going to have faith and who are going to contend with him, who he knows are not going to have faith and who are going to contend with him because they are going to see him as the enemy, even though he's not, We understand this. So Jesus wants to make clear, you must continue to follow, God's commands to us, I don't nullify those. He says that later on in the Gospels, that I don't come to abolish the law, what you've been given. I come to fulfill it, I come to complete it. That's my job, That's my identity. That's my mission. If the witnesses that surrounded Jesus, this sort of crowd of groupies that are immediately, attracted to him and his power, if those that surround him are able to convince those who might be against him that he is not there to be against them, his ministry will unfold differently. Because part of what's going on that you see here, and you see this also a little bit in the story of John the Baptist and the prophets and those who go about in deserted places, who do not hang around in the urban areas and in the towns and in the synagogues where the religious authorities are, is because the wilderness is the only place that they can be and not be harassed. Now, Jesus came to save people. Do you and I think that Jesus particularly enjoys being out in deserted places where there are no people. Of course not. Why would God come to earth and say, I'm going to go hang out over here where there's nobody and just kind of mill about in isolation, and this is how I'm going to save the world? Evidently not. God became incarnate to be near his creatures. My sense is this, obviously, right, that if the Lord had, we'll say, a preference, he would prefer to be near you rather than far from you, even physically so in his body. If he could have gone about in the towns and in the synagogues and preached freely and taught freely and healed freely without any thought that there was going to be retribution, would he have done that? I think it's a no-brainer. I think he would have done that. However, Jesus respects authority, even the authority that he has given over, right, through the law of Moses, to those that were still in power. And so if those that were still in power were unwilling to sort of acquiesce to his divine authority and his divine power, which seemed to be against them, in respect to them, in order to be not confrontational, in order to not make an overt ruckus that would really put confusion into the minds and the hearts of the people, we see him immediately, even from the very beginning, being very cautious and treading very lightly in regards to the authority that was already there. It's already kind of a premonition, right, that you see of what's going to happen on his death. Jesus died at the hands of authority. He didn't die because he was sick. He didn't die because he was crazy and threw himself into martyrdom. Right? He didn't die because he was a military leader and led people in battle. He died for the very thing that we're seeing in chapter 1, right? The opening chapter of the gospel. That he's going to deal with a human power who's confused about the purpose of that power. And I think this is part of what makes it so sad for the Lord. That the authority that he gave originally through the law of Moses was given over to the Levites for the good of the people, for the protection of the people, right, in regards even to physical maladies. But even then, to see that power is always given, authority is always given for the good of another. This is why God distributes it, not merely for the sake of holding that and wielding that authority, which is what Jesus enters into, right? So that Jesus is now, because this man does not respect the authority, the law that God did give through Moses, and instead of going to the priests to offer for them proof of his cleansing, instead going abroad and publicizing it, the path of Jesus has changed, right? The ministry of Jesus has changed. Jesus begins to be viewed even more suspiciously by the scribes and the Pharisees, not because of what he's doing, but because of the way that people are acting around him, right? So it's like the rumor mill, or looking afar and saying, oh, I bet I know what's going on there. And look, all of these people around it prove it for me that Jesus really is who we think he is, which is one who's going to come and usurp our authority and try to act macho. So here's the invitation. The invitation that Jesus gives to this man is critical for all of us in regards not only to power and authority, but in a special and specific way in regards to God's heart for pity and compassion. That one whose heart is so meek and so mild as to give pity and compassion to each of us in our lives. That pity and compassion is never given over to us without the sort of intrinsic response that it would seem to demand from us. And we naturally know this, that one who is meek and mild in our midst. You ever had that sense being in someone's presence like that, and you just have this sort of natural reaction in their presence where you just kind of feel like all of a sudden a little more relaxed, all of a sudden a little more safe, all of a sudden a little more peaceful, and they may not even say anything or do anything, you just kind of feel it. Man, I've had that before. It's awesome. I love being around those people. But it's not then for us to sort of be in that person's presence, meek and mild, and then to want to attract presence to that person in a way that that person might not want. So obedience, right? Being a part of our healing, and do we pray with that? Do we ask ourselves to the Lord, Lord, can you help me with the humility to abide in your compassion for me, simply in the way that you've asked it of me, so that I don't become a cause of confusion for others in regards to you who also want to be near to those others. We see that happen all the time in our world. And it kind of ties in, right? One of the things that we were sort of reflecting on last week is that when there's so many people saying so many things, how do you know which authority is worthy of trust? And the truth is you don't. Because of that confusion, because of perhaps the misguided response or the retweets or the whatever else is. And then it doesn't really give solutions to the world. It just causes people to be more divided. And so our response to the passion, the compassion, the pity of Jesus, the mercy of Jesus, is to respond in kind. Do you want to know the reason? Do you want to know the reason that Moses was able to bring God's healing to Miriam? Because God said this, that by far, Moses is the meekest man on the face of the earth. This was part of God's conversation with Moses and Miriam and Aaron in regards to why God spoke to Moses face to face and why God gave Moses such power to lead and such charism in order to display that divine power. It was because of the meekness of Moses. And so Jesus also, coming meek and mild, desires to, we'll say, produce children, to produce brothers and sisters, to produce heirs of the kingdom who are like him, meek and mild, whose own example of their lives don't go out into the world to produce further confusion that the world doesn't need, especially in the face of those authorities who are already against Christ. But then, right, as St. Paul simply mentioned in the second reading, that what we do, whether we eat, whether we drink, whatever we do, it gives glory to God, so that in all things we avoid giving offense, whether to Jews or to Greeks or to the church of God. Therefore, we seek not our own benefits, but that of the many, so that many may be saved.